this is not just a prison. It is a ghost, haunting the vast, empty quarter of the Syrian desert. A place so brutal, its very name was once spoken in whispers.
I was a child when I was arrested for the first time and when I was tortured for the first time. And then I was released and I was arrested again for 3 years. And these 3 years, the Syrian regime has managed to show us all sort of torture and starvation and all sort of mental torture.
A place designed not for rehabilitation, but for annihilation. They called it Tadmor. For decades, it was a black site, a state secret buried in the sands, a laboratory of punishment. Who built this fortress of despair? What kind of man could command its horrors?
لكم من القلب التحية. لكم من قلبي التحية.
And how, against all odds, did some of the world's most dangerous inmates dare to dream of escape from a place known as the end of the world? Tonight, we go behind the crumbling walls, into the heart of the desert inferno. In the shadow of the glorious ruins of Palmyra, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, lies its dark, modern counterpart, Tadmor Military Prison, also known as Palmyra Prison. Its location was no accident. Built by the French Mandate authorities in the 1930s, it was originally intended to quell Syrian nationalist rebels. Its remote placement served two purposes: isolation and deterrence.
So imagine when the guards came to our cells, and the guard would tell me and my cellmates that we had to choose one of us to be killed tomorrow, tortured to death tomorrow. And if we don't choose one of us, they may kill 5 or 10. And then the guard leaves. And you sit in your cell with your cellmates.
The architectural design was a masterpiece of control. Based on the Panopticon concept, it was a massive, rectangular fortress built around a central courtyard. The cells were arranged along long, open balconies, allowing guards a clear line of sight. But the French design was merely the skeleton. The Syrian regime would later add the flesh and blood of pure terror. The walls were thick, ancient stone, holding in the heat of the day and the bitter cold of the desert night. Windows were small, barred slits. The entire complex was a psychological weapon, a constant reminder to inmates that they were trapped in the middle of nowhere, at the mercy of the elements and their jailers.
Hundreds of thousands dead, millions displaced or in exile. But perhaps nothing illustrates the deep depravity more than the atrocious archipelago of prisons and torture centers where tens of thousands were killed by the regime.
Throughout its history, Tadmor held two types of dangerous inmates. The first were political prisoners, intellectuals, students, and activists who opposed the regimes of Hafez and Bashar al-Assad.
Inside some of these now liberated hells on earth, as Syrians search for answers and for their loved ones.
But after the outbreak of the Syrian civil war, Tadmor became a dumping ground for a new kind of threat. High-ranking jihadists from ISIS and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham found themselves in the same cells that once held their ideological enemies. The irony was crushing. The world's most notorious terrorists were now inmates in the regime's most notorious prison. But to understand Tadmor, you must understand the man who perfected its cruelty, Rifaat al-Assad. As commander of the defense companies, the regime's Praetorian Guard, Rifaat was given control of Tadmor. It was under his command in the late 1970s and 80s that the prison earned its hellish reputation. The guards, known as the Palmyra Corps, were recruited almost exclusively from the Assad family's Alawite sect, ensuring loyalty above all else. Their training was not in rehabilitation, but in brutality. They were desensitized, taught to view inmates as subhuman, as enemies of the state to be broken.
The question saying, who wants to be killed tomorrow brutally and never go back to their family? Who wants to never smell the fresh air again? Who wants to never be able to feel anything and just die? And it's a very challenging question. And then we had to find ways, because it was not the easiest thing to get a volunteer for. So we had to make a lottery where the name that get picked or the number that get picked get killed tomorrow behind our backs by the guard. So that's an example of what these prisons are like, and why it was very necessary to to free all the prisoners inside them, because those are not prisons where any human rights are reserved in any way. And the people in these prisons, in my experience, are not criminals.
Betrayal or misconduct by an officer was dealt with mercilessly. The penalty ranged from immediate imprisonment within Tadmor itself, a fate worse than death, to execution. The system was designed to be airtight, creating a culture of fear that governed both the guards and the guarded. The routine at Tadmor was a form of slow psychological execution. Inmates were woken before dawn for a head count that could last for hours. They were given a single daily meal, a thin lentil soup and a piece of stale bread, often contaminated with sand and insects. Water was rationed, a precious commodity in the desert heat. Cells designed for 4 men held 40. Sanitation was non-existent. Disease, typhoid, tuberculosis ran rampant. Interrogation and torture were not occasional events. They were part of the daily calendar. The goal was to extinguish hope. But hope is a stubborn thing. In 2008, a group of Islamist militants, including high-value commanders, plotted the impossible: an escape from Tadmor. Their plan was audacious. They had identified the one critical loophole in the prison's design: its age and the arrogance of its guards. The stone and mortar of the ancient building, weakened by time and neglect, was their ticket out. Using makeshift tools, they painstakingly loosened the bars of a cell window. On a prearranged night, during a shift change when guard vigilance was at its lowest, they made their move. Dozens of inmates escaped into the desert night. While most were recaptured or died of exposure, the event was a profound embarrassment for the regime. It proved that even the most fortified fortress has its weaknesses, not in its walls, but in the human element that guards them. The story of Tadmor does not have a clean ending. In 2015, as ISIS forces advanced on Palmyra, the Syrian government evacuated the prison, transferring inmates to other facilities. The symbolic fortress of the regime was abandoned to the very extremists it once housed. ISIS later released propaganda videos of themselves walking through the empty, decaying halls, a twisted victory lap. Today, Tadmor stands as a crumbling ruin, a ghost of its former self. But its legacy is etched into the soul of Syria. It remains the ultimate symbol of a system built on absolute power, fear, and the brutal suppression of dissent. It was a place where humanity was tested, and where, all too often, it failed. The desert winds now blow through its broken corridors, but the screams of the past are forever trapped in the stone. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next documentary.